have conversations here locally all the time with folks. I haven't lived in one of those homes. I've been in those homes in the Cahaba project, but even last week, I talked to someone who said we were experiencing some bad weather down here. It's that time of year, and he said, "I'm not worried because my house is built like a tank."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing. Some of the things that you thought might be a detriment to the work turned out to be a plus. They spent much of their money on, most of their money, I think it was supposed to be 85% on labor. And that meant that in many cases, the materials had to be found locally. And so you're dealing with local stone, things like that, local wood, shingles, so on and so forth. But in so many cases, that worked to make the projects better and stronger, and provided building materials that are better than they might have been otherwise. And again, they did good work.
They did, and that again, I spoke with a different neighbor this past weekend actually, who kind of posed that to me. We were looking at the types of jobs that people were able to get in the construction of the Cahaba project between 1936 and 1938.
Mm-hmm.
And we were looking at what they made per hour. And he asked me this question. He said, speaking to how well built those homes were, how much time went into them, he said, why do you think it was so well built? And I said, well, I don't really know what you mean, but just give me the answer, right? And he said, when that brick mason, when that carpenter, when that, whatever position you were able to get, whenever you were finished with your job, now you no longer had a job again. So it almost behooved them to be thorough and build it as well as possible. And in a way, 2 years for 287 homes in the 30s to me is really fast. But apparently for them, that was just incredibly thorough and incredibly well built structures that were built to last. And we're still seeing that today with most of that neighborhood still intact.
Yeah. Well, now you're going to have the countervailing argument at the time was that, and you would see pictures of photographs, and I spent a lot of time in the National Archives when I was doing my research, and you see photographs of long lines of men with wheelbarrows, right?
Mm.
And you'll see other just men assembled with shovels. And so because the WPA had to spend the majority of its budget on labor, you had a lot of people digging and filling wheelbarrows, and a lot of people pushing those wheelbarrows to, put the dirt wherever it's supposed to go,
right,
and coming back with those wheelbarrows. And while the wheelbarrows were gone, the guys were standing waiting for the wheelbarrows to come back so they'd have some place to put what they dug up with their shovels, that dirt again. That was a design of the WPA, but of course the conservatives at the time would call this. There was a word invented during the New Deal called boondoggles. Boondoggling was it stands now for kind of a make work job of not much, didn't produce much value. That started at a New York Board of Aldermen hearing where people were asked to do talk about what kind of jobs they had under the Roosevelt administration, and one guy taught crafts to kids, and he said he taught boondoggles, which is a kind of when you might weave a leather keychain or a key fob or something like that. Right. And so boondoggling became a word for the conservative media would print articles like this week's boondoggle, and there was always something to do with the WPA. But in fact, as you point out, the the work was largely good. It was, you saw people with long line. Oh, and another satirist came up with something called the WPA shovel, which had a whole handle that you could fold down to lean on. But that was really sniping at a very very effective project, because the work, as we've discussed, lasts today, and it's because, you know, when people work, you know, and I think that the failure to understand this is amazing to me. But most people, when they work, want to do a good job, and they want to keep working, as you point out, but they want their work to last. They don't want to go back to have to, you know, fix it. And the idea that people find dignity in work, and that that dignity is reflected in not only in the paycheck that they receive, but in the work that they've done, is really a fundamental American, if not a human, characteristic. You want to do a good job. I mean, you know, you're working from home doing a podcast about the Cahaba project, and you know, you're doing it well. It's not, sloppiness is not as is really not an option for most workers, I think.
Yeah.